Thanks to the sponsor of this video, the Wolves of Langston, I tried my first solo campaign of all time. And I just wanted to give you guys my impressions on my solo campaign experience. Let's do this. So just to cut out the drama, I'm going to tell you straight up that it was a good experience. I had fun. It was more like D&D than I ever expected it to be, but there's definitely some things I want to talk about on the pros and cons side. Now I want to talk about my pros first, the things that stood out to me that I was like, dang, that was really, really smart. So the first thing is I think the PDF format is absolutely the way to play through a solo campaign. Because at the end of each paragraph, it's going to say, depending on what you did, go to X. Go to 27. And in the PDF format, every single one of those is a link. So you can just click and it takes you directly to 27. So you're not flipping through pages or scrolling up and down. PDF is absolutely the way to do it. And once I figured that out, my speed of playing through it went up exponentially. The next thing I want to say is they were really creative with all the different ways to branch paths. What I mean by that is you might have a skill check. You might have a saving throw. Depending on if you succeed or fail, it branches. But then sometimes you just have choices. You know, I just want to do this. Okay, so let's branch off that way. I like that. But then it came up with some really interesting ones. If you have the ability to read this language or any sort of spell that can help you read that language, go for it. Or if you have proficiency in this, go this way. It was really creative in all the different ways it branched paths. And not only that, it was incredibly smart about how it branched its paths. And let me explain a little bit. Now I've tried to design some choose your own adventures, and how I did it is, you know, if we're at 1, it branches to 2 and 3. But what they did is they split up all their branches in such a way that you're never next to something that would spoil your choice. So as you bounce around, you're never getting spoilers. It's a really, really smart way to not influence the player's choices and let them just make their choices. Additionally, they were able to do something I would call gameplay loops. And this is best described in interrogations. They did their interrogations so well. So there's this person and you have a couple questions to ask them. So you can ask them one question and go through that pathway, and you can either be done questioning them or you can go back and ask them the questions that you missed. And so it has this way of, so long as you haven't asked this question before, you're allowed to ask it. But whenever you ask that question, whatever pathway was done is set in stone. You can't go back and try the same pathway again. It was a really smart way of handling it, and it actually made me feel like I was interrogating someone. I really loved it. Super smart. The next thing I want to say is that items really stood out to me. And also it's like I have my D&D Beyond character sheet, right? I'm bouncing everywhere. That was pretty cool. Is it, you know, I was bouncing from saving throw to skills to fighting to items, and it really felt like I was using my whole character sheet. And a big piece of that was the items. So throughout the adventure, you collect these items, and a lot of them are worded in such a way that it opens your imagination of all the different things you can do with it. And it feels like it's not just meant for this adventure. It feels like you could take this character, go to a next campaign, and probably find some pretty unique and cool things you can do with these old items. And finally, the most important part is the story. Was the story good? And the answer is yes. They were really clever with their story. Specifically, there was some twists that I didn't see coming. Now, you could say that it's a murder mystery, so there is the core twist of who is the murderer, and I got that one pretty quick. But what was cool is all the twists around that central twist, which I thought was pretty fun. Those are definitely the biggest twists that are gonna stick with me. The ones that inspire me as a DM, like, oh, that's really cool. I could take that and put that in my own campaign world. Those were the side twist. The main twist was okay. Now let's talk about where they can improve. And this actually begins with something they did really well. Something really cool they did is you can just build a 5e character, level 1 or 2, and get started playing. And if you don't want to do that, they have pre-made characters you can go get started playing. So that's all awesome. And it makes it really accessible to D&D 5e players. But there is a catch to that, and that's really the combat. The combat doesn't work. D&D 5e combat does not work here. Every single combat was a one-on-one. Every single combat was you roll, I roll, you roll, I roll. It was literally just initiative, most efficient attacks versus most efficient attacks. And there was no movement, there was no tactics, it was dull. And my character didn't even take a hit a single time. Now I rolled well, and it was a monk, so I had 18 AC, but the whole campaign, I didn't take a point of damage. And even if I had, there's a short or long rest after every single one of the combats. So my suggestion would be for these types to actually turn a combat into branching paths. To say that, like, do you want to attempt to drop a rock on their head? Do you attempt to want to punch them? Do you attempt to want to do this? Go to this section depending on what you do and see if you succeed. If you don't, you take some damage. If you do, you damage it. And you have like these branching paths combat. for this format, that would work so much better and be so much more engaging. That is by far my biggest gripe. The next thing I'd say were characters could be inconsistent, and what I mean is how well developed the characters were, which makes sense, but there was definitely stronger characters than others. The fiancé of the murdered victim stood out as strong to me. Had a strong personality, a strong identity, you were able to see into it. Same with the mayor. I really like the mayor. But then you have the druid and the cleric, and both of their personalities seemed underdeveloped to me. So they're both strong in this regard, but they can also improve in this regard, that the characterization could have been done a bit better. Now my next gripe requires a little bit of explanation. When you get to the end, you are essentially accusing someone and you're bringing forward your evidence. And one thing I really liked is that I got there and I was like, oh shoot, there's some evidence I didn't get. That's pretty neat. Somewhere along those branching paths, I missed some evidence. Awesome. I love to see that. That means there was story that could have existed that didn't exist for my playthrough, and that's a good thing. But what I didn't like is that all of the evidence comes from one chapter. So you play these other chapters and you get cool items from them, but you don't get evidence. I think it would have been more powerful to get different pieces of evidence as well as red herring pieces of evidence throughout the whole campaign. Now this is getting nitpicky, and I want to be clear here that I had a good time, and that's the most important thing. And so the next thing to discuss is just kind of overall, you do definitely lose something when you don't have a group there. A big piece of D&D is the party dynamic. However, I want to make it clear that I was there. Their descriptions in this book are excellent. My character, Investigator Knapp, felt like he fit right in. There was basically nothing that jarred me saying, oh, it could be for anyone. No, this felt like Investigator Knapp's adventure, and I liked that. And the descriptions were so good. Really fantastic at making me feel the atmosphere. I really went there, and that's amazing for them to do, just kind of writing down, because it really takes a good DM to take you to a place to really be there, and they managed to accomplish that with this book. So at the end of the day, I'm both impressed with the technical structure of how they designed it. Again, the word that comes to mind is it's just smart. How they put together this book is just smart. But also, their storytelling and description are excellent. Fantastic. I think there's some things that can be improved in the storytelling and the structure, but they're few and far between. And so what that leaves me is I can definitely suggest this experience to anybody who has never played a solo campaign or enjoys solo campaign or just loves D&D and a good story. You'll find that here. Who I can't recommend this to is someone who's only playing D&D for the group experience or someone who's there for the combat and the tactics. And I know those types of players, and this is definitely not for them. But I can say for me, it was definitely worth the time I put into it, and it was a fantastic experience. And if you guys are wanting to try it out, you can find it in the description down below. And not only am I happy to recommend the Wolves of Langston, I'm also happy to recommend pretty much whatever Obvious Mimic comes up with. They're the ones who created the Wolves of Langston, and they happen to be having a Kickstarter for the Crystals of Zaleth. Now, the Crystals of Zaleth is not a murder mystery campaign, it's actually a survival campaign. So you're gonna get a total different brand of flavor, and I think that's really cool, and I'm excited to see what they come up with. You can also check out that Kickstarter down below if you're interested in seeing it through. But with that, my friends, as always, I just wanna say thank you so much. You are all incredible. Thank you for taking the time to watch the video and support the channel, and I hope to see you on the next one. See you then.